For over a decade, right? One show didn't just take over our TVs. It became this massive cultural thing. But what if I told you that the show you know, the one you love, was almost something completely different, like unrecognizable?
I mean, think about it. 12 seasons, 279 episodes. We basically let these characters live in our homes, right? Their jokes became our jokes. But here's the crazy part. The show we all binged and quoted, it was almost a totally different story.
Oh, the answer is a huge, resounding yes. Before we got the quirky, kind of lovable nerds we all know, there was this first attempt, a pilot with a much, much meaner vibe. We're talking about a version of the show so different, it honestly feels like it's from a parallel universe. So, to really get how much this thing changed, we've got to go back, way back, before the first episode ever hit the airwaves. We're going back to a pilot that was so bad, test audiences just flat out hated it. Okay, so this original pilot, it was dark. Like, way more cynical. Instead of the sweet, girl next door Penny, we got this character named Katie. And she wasn't just edgy, she was genuinely mean to Leonard and Sheldon. But honestly, that's not even the biggest shocker. The most mind-blowing difference was Sheldon.
This proto-Sheldon, he was actually interested in women, like actively chasing them. It's a total 180 from the Sheldon we know and love, right? The guy who thought holding hands was an extreme sport and didn't, seal the deal until season 9. It's just wild.
And get this, the rest of the crew was a total mystery too. Our favorite duo, Howard and Raj, they didn't even exist yet. Nope. Instead, there was this other physicist named Gilder who was stuck in this super awkward love triangle with Leonard. Unsurprisingly, test audiences hated it, so the whole thing got tossed out and they had to start from scratch. But even after they completely retooled the pilot, the show was still, well, it was finding its footing in that first season. And that led to some really, really bizarre moments that have pretty much been scrubbed from the show's history. Now, here's something you might not know. If you've only ever caught the show in reruns, you've probably never seen its actual first scene. I'm talking about the original cold open, that little bit before the theme song. In it, Leonard and Sheldon go to a high IQ sperm bank. Why? To get money for faster internet. I'm not kidding. Yeah, the whole scene was so weirdly out of character that the creator, Chuck Lorre, just decided to cut it from reruns. The only problem, it made a joke later in the episode make absolutely no sense. And if you were unlucky enough to be watching on a plane, you'd get this super polite and super confusing message telling you why the scene wasn't there. It's kind of easy to forget now, but back in 2007, nerd culture wasn't the huge deal it is today. That whole explosion didn't really kick off until Iron Man hit theaters a year later. So in the early days of Big Bang, the writers had a pretty simple rule of thumb. If it just sounds nerdy, just roll with it. And that's why we get these hilarious scenes where the guys are playing Klingon Boggle, which, by the way, is not a real thing. Or they're off on some quest in World of Warcraft, but in a place that just doesn't exist in the game. But hey, for most of us watching at home, it sounded plausible enough to get a laugh. And this early awkwardness, it wasn't just in the script. It was literally built into the walls of the set. That apartment we all know so well, the one that became this amazing treasure trove of nerdy Easter eggs, well, it started out with some, let's just say, very odd and out-of-place decorating choices. So if you go back and look really closely at the apartment in season 1, you'll spot stuff that just doesn't make sense. Like books are turned with their spines facing the wall, something that would have given the Sheldon we know a full-blown panic attack. There's a sci-fi novel on the shelf that's actually a gothic romance. And that cool robot poster? It's really an ad for a Belgian beer. Who knew? But these early growing pains weren't just about fake games and weird props. No, that first season actually planted the seeds for some serious, real-world stuff. We're talking legal battles and huge cultural debates that would follow the show for years to come.
Remember Soft Kitty? Of course you do. Sheldon introduces it in episode 11. Well, that little lullaby, as innocent as it sounds, ended up at the center of a massive copyright lawsuit back in 2015. Turns out, the family of a poet from 1937 claimed they owned the lyrics. The case eventually got dismissed, but man, what a crazy legal saga for a simple song about a sleepy cat.
Now let's talk about Sheldon. The show never, ever explicitly says it, right? But his character traits, they made him a huge, even if it was unintentional, part of the mainstream conversation about autism. For millions of people watching, he was the very first time they'd seen a main character on a huge sitcom who had such obvious autistic traits.
And this started a debate that went on for more than 10 years. Was Sheldon a good representation, or was it a harmful stereotype? And what about his friends? Did they treat him with the understanding he really needed? It's honestly one of the show's most complicated and most important legacies.
Okay, let's be real for a second. There's just no getting around it. A lot of the jokes in the early seasons have not aged well. At all. It was a product of its time, and that time was 2007. But what's really fascinating is that even back then, it feels like the show kind of knew it had a problem.
Just look at this one exchange. So Howard would often do this stereotypical Indian accent when he talked to Raj's parents. And the writers didn't just let it fly. They had Raj call him out on it, saying he made him sound like Apu from The Simpsons. That's a critique that was years ahead of the big cultural conversation we all had about that exact character.
You know, for a guy who was completely obsessed with facts, Sheldon Cooper had a surprisingly loose relationship with the truth, especially when it came to his own childhood. A lot of the stories he tells in season 1 were, to put it gently, not exactly accurate. So in season 1, Sheldon paints this picture of a super chaotic childhood, right? He talks about his house being on the verge of falling apart and some traumatic time at a German boarding school. But then the prequel show, Young Sheldon, comes along and tells a totally different story. We see a pretty normal suburban family and, yeah, no German boarding school anywhere.
So what's the deal? Is it just a huge plot hole? Actually, no. It turns out there's this really brilliant in-universe explanation. The finale of Young Sheldon drops this bombshell. The entire prequel is being narrated by adult Sheldon as he's writing his memoir. He's finally sorting through the facts and the fictions of his own life story.
And this twist, it just reframes everything. It basically suggests that not just the prequel, but maybe the whole 12 seasons of The Big Bang Theory, it's all being told through Sheldon's own flawed, exaggerated, and totally unreliable memory. It's a seriously clever way to explain away a decade's worth of inconsistencies, you have to admit. And that leaves us with this really fascinating final thought, doesn't it? We weren't watching the world as it actually happened. We were seeing it as Sheldon remembers it. So was he a liar, or was he just the hero of his own story? It really makes you think about memory itself, and how in our own way, maybe all of us are the unreliable narrators of our own lives.